Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the podcast Strikes Back. My name is George and you're listening to our spoiler review of The Irishman with the boys Connor.
Hello.
And Benny.
Hi there.
I think since we started this podcast in April 2017, The Irishman was one of those first stories we covered. It's been a long journey. We've heard drips and drabs over the years, and now finally this experiment is here. Martin Scorsese, the master of cinema, coming to a streaming platform, Netflix, and making a film. Who would have thought? A film, not a comic book film, but a film.
Not a movie, not a roller coaster ride. This is a fucking film.
But here we are. It's out. It's had a little bit of a cinema run. So to appease Scorsese, I'm sure that was part of the deal that he inked. And we're getting into spoilers. No bullshit on this podcast. We're getting straight into it, but actually we're not going to get straight into it. We're going to talk about a little bit of bullshit. What we were feeling going in. 2.5 years of talking about it on the podcast. Trailers coming out. How is everyone feeling just before The Irishman started? Connor.
Psych.
Whoa.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, this has been on our radar for ages, and just the kind of, I guess, remit alone put this on such a level of hype that my assumption was that it was never going to reach that level of hype. So they had like this kind of Scorsese is doing a Netflix film. It's with Pesci and De Niro and Pacino, and like that, just that kind of poster is like, all right, well, this is so hyped. This is going to be the Scorsese classic gangster film, and with all the classic gangster characters or actors, and so yeah, I was super concerned about going in about that kind of expectation based purely on that. And then comes along this idea that it's going to take place over several decades and that they are going to de-age De Niro and Pesci and just like that to me was a bizarre way to go.
Prune face Pesci.
Sorry?
Prune face Pesci.
Prune face, like that man has so many folds in his face. When he was a young guy.
It's nothing if not ambitious.
Very ambitious, right? And part of me was quite surprised because it didn't seem like a move that Scorsese would make. I don't know why I thought that. It just kind of didn't feel quite on brand. He always seems like such a visceral story, like a filmmaker,
like in camera kind of guy.
Yeah, that there's very little that I would have assumed. Like this didn't seem like the kind of project that he would go all out on a CGI budget for. But nonetheless, that was the way that they were going, and a lot of people focused on that in the trailers. I was quite lenient on how they looked. There were some scenes that looked kind of wonkier than others, but on the whole, I was willing to give it a bit of a pass. So yeah, going into this, heard a lot about it being really great, heard a lot about it being slightly boring, and everything in between. So I kind of went into this more curious than anything else, ultimately.
Benny, you got a little bit of you went to the cinema and saw this.
I saw this in the cinema because I'm a film fan.
Well done.
No,
Is that hung up on your wall?
That would be more like the theme park version of it, right? In the cinema, more so than at home. I don't know. I just ran out to see this straight away because, like you said, we've been talking about it so long. It's one of the major releases of the year, one of the most anticipated films. It's Scorsese. You kind of got to give the man his due, I guess. That being said, overall, I'm not a huge Scorsese guy, really. In part, that's ignorance. I haven't seen a lot of his movies, and in part, maybe it's just time. It's been a long time since I've seen either Goodfellas or Casino, and I think both of them are on DVD, which is always a different experience. Absolutely love Wolf of Wall Street. That was definitely my favorite leading up to this. Didn't like Hugo very much. I never saw Silence. But he's kind of held up as this, real icon of filmmaking, of cinema. So good for everyone who gets all of that out of his stuff. But for me, the prospect of seeing, all these actors coming together again under this director, I'm like, whatever. That doesn't mean anything to me necessarily. And then, of course, you get into the whole, it's a Netflix movie and they're spending $100 million on de-aging everyone. and it's 3.5 hours long, which is probably my main trepidation going in, was having to sit in not the most comfy cinema for 3.5 hours. But the idea, I mean, he has been moving steadily into the world of like visual effects quite strongly for a few years now. Like Wolf of Wall Street, I don't know if you guys have seen the videos that kind of deconstruct a lot of the kind of invisible effects in that movie. It's really effects heavy, which is really surprising.
I suppose it is, like that entire tennis scene. I remember
Yeah, that
like
was,
seeing that like
almost completely CGI or something.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I don't know, whatever he can clearly do. But anyway, the proof was in the pudding. So I was waiting for a trailer to come along, and that first trailer came along, and it wasn't so much what was on display that I took issue with, but what wasn't. Like, it felt like they were trying really hard to hide it. I'm like, that seems like such a bad sign. There was that trailer more recently, last week or the week before, that I thought was
The
so
Netflix
much
trailer,
better.
yeah.
Yeah, it was
Post
such a
cinema
better trailer.
release.
Yeah, I'd already seen the film by that point, though. So that was me going into the thing. Not all that excited, to be honest, but ready to give it a go.
Yeah, I thought that first trailer was really not the greatest. And luckily the latest trailer that you just mentioned was, and all those things you mentioned with the de-aging, that was a massive concern for this. It could have, that's the linchpin of success, but I was always, Robert De Niro, he's had some real bad ones recently that I haven't even gone near, but Bad Grandpa or Dirty Grandpa or something. He's not getting the best scripts in front of him, and to see the gang of Pesci, De Niro, Scorsese unite again, it's
Pacino.
tantalizing.
Ray Romano.
Add in Ray Romano, add in
Pacino.
It's all there for the taking, but is it all going to break under the weight of all these CVs of all these guys? That was definitely a concern. And the 3.5 hour runtime, you guys know, listeners, and you guys, Connor and Benny, know better than anyone that I get fidgety in movies, and if a film isn't justifying its runtime, I sort of want things to wrap up quicker than they often do. So that was a concern.
You show this by just falling asleep.
Yes. I mean, it shows utter disdain, right?
Just not even disdain, just like, you are not on my radar enough to keep me awake.
Just even consciousness.
Yeah.
Yeah, it
Not
doesn't even
worthy.
deserve my consciousness.
So should we jump into this?
Yeah, let's talk. Let's talk spoilers for those who haven't seen the film. You probably should get out of here and let's just give
3.5 hours of your life.
That's it.
Watching it.
But let's give a quick recommendation for those who are going to just jump out of here. Would you recommend The Irishman?
Okay, yeah, I suppose we can do that.
Yes,
Kind of giving it
100%.
away.
100% recommend watching this, and in a cinema if you can. Because I know that if I'd sat down to watch this at home, I would not be able to stay away from my phone, and I would maybe fall asleep. I
Can
have no
confirm.
idea.
I would suggest watching this in the cinema, mostly because I didn't. This movie, I think, will and has been dividing people in the sense that it is very long, and I think it only just scrapes by justifying that length. So yeah, if you're a massive Scorsese fan, or if you're a really big fan of mobster movies,
Then you've already seen it.
Yeah, well, you've already seen it, but also go check it out because it's more of what you love. If you're someone that isn't particularly a fan of, or doesn't really give two craps about Scorsese or these characters or that style of film, I definitely this is not worth putting yourself through it.
I would definitely recommend this. If you've got a Netflix account, get on this. I think this would be a fantastic cinema experience. I myself would love to go check it out if it's still out. Who knows? I thought it was really just delivered in spades. I thought that the 3.5 hour runtime whisked by, and I guess we'll talk about that more.
Well, let's jump into
the spoiler review.
Yeah.
Can I suggest we get the technical aspect out of the way? Just have a big discussion about the CGI, and then we can talk about the actual movie itself after that.
Okay, yeah, let's
de-aging?
do that. Let's do that.
That's the hot topic.
Because that was the biggest concern, I think, going into this.
That and the runtime. But yeah, let's talk about that. So I think that there were varying degrees of competence that were shown off in this film.
I completely agree.
I think that of everything, De Niro was probably done the best in terms of the de-aging. which is the main kind of CGI effect in this, in his face. One of the most bizarre things about this film is you would see a relatively well-constructed CGI face on a very obviously old body. And there was one scene in particular, if we're going to jump into spoilers, of De Niro beating up the shopkeeper.
Oh my God, that was
where
hilarious.
he was obviously an old man, like kicking like an old man.
And the guy is like screaming for his life, like, help, an 80-year-old man is stepping on my finger.
That was
And it's
amazing.
very clearly an
That
80-year-old
was
man.
fantastic.
It's like, why wasn't there a body double for that scene? So weird.
I mean, like that would have been the obvious thing.
Let's replace him.
Anyone with eyes can tell that this is obviously an old man beating up a young man. And like,
That was hilarious.
I mean, that was the most, I think, like egregious example of that. There was a lot of like in the mannerisms or the movements of De Niro and Pacino and Pesci. Pesci less so because his character was more refined in his movements. But anyone that had to do any like action or moving of any sort is quite obvious that these were older men playing younger
I
people.
disagree. I think that what it came down to was the time, how far back they were aging them. I thought when they were younger, the de-aging, like there was one particular scene when they were leaning over a car, and I thought, whoa, this is like video game territory.
Pesci calls De Niro kid, and like no one there looks younger than 55.
Yeah.
But-
Okay,
but-
so
and-
this is what I mean. Like,
But as we get older, like, I thought it looked flawless in a lot of scenes,
I completely
especially
agree.
in the middle
yeah.
chunk. I think that
I was simply in that I was just addressing the discrepancy between the like. At no point was I fooled that these were young men's bodies. Like I'm just saying, like the discrepancy between the face and the movement. of it.
right.
Yeah, and I definitely agree. Like the farther back you go, the more wonky it goes.
Because I thought that, and it wasn't that far they were pushing him back. Al Pacino, but if there was any de-aging going on there, it looked pretty much flawless to me.
Really?
Yeah, I thought he looked fantastic. I thought all the de-aging in that middle chunk and the later chunks, I thought the makeup in general was really, really well done. It was those earlier scenes, the World War, the war scene. That's where it looked really wonky for me.
See, I thought that,
And it
out
never
of
became
all
a
of them-
distraction either. After those initial scenes, when we were through that, I was like, okay, we're into this and it's not a distraction. That was my experience.
Yeah, I said in the last episode of the pod, I think it's the most accomplished de-aging we've ever seen. And I completely stand by that, if only because of the sheer volume of it.
Yeah.
There's definitely wonky parts here and there, but, when you're talking about Michael Douglas in Ant-Man, that's like a minute or two of the movie. Whereas this is a 3.5 hour movie that I don't even know kind of where the de-aging stops and the aging is,
Yeah.
like with
particularly
makeup.
when it's closer to their actual ages.
Completely, yeah.
Exactly.
Because there are some really
It's far
stark
subtler.
examples where you think it's like, okay, this must be just De Niro as he is now. But then you get to the end of the movie and he's looking so old and frail. It's like, okay, no, where's the effect?
Yes.
Where's the line here? Because some of it is like
Some of it's
I can't pick
practical.
it.
Some of it must be practical.
100%, yeah. But some of it is so flawless. And even stuff who are like the ones who are most worried about, like Joe Pesci, there are definitely some kind of rubbery scenes here and there when you're getting a real good look at him. But there are other ones where you see him in a scene and he looks pretty damn good. And this is an actor you haven't seen in a movie for like 20, 30 years.
Yeah.
So you're like, oh, I guess what he looks like. But then you see him at his actual age, or what I presume it is, and you're like, holy fuck, they did so much
old
work
as
on
fuck,
him and
man.
it looks really good. Yeah.
Yeah, and De Niro's character as well, with the blue eyes and his CG work. Frank Sheeran almost is not really Robert De Niro. He becomes something different because Robert De Niro didn't look like that when he was younger.
No, not at all.
So he almost becomes this strange sort of half CG, half real character, which is kind of fascinating. And I definitely think they pulled it off because I had a very much an emotional connection with that character and what he was going through. The CG never became Uncanny Valley, like pulled me out of it after those initial scenes. I must say at the beginning, I was like, please, 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 please. And then it was fine. But that initial scene when they were leaning over the car, I don't know, man. I was sort of thinking to myself, oh, God.
There was definitely a disconnect throughout, though, to some degree.
Yeah.
Mostly retrospectively being like, how old was anyone meant to be at any point in that film?
It was very unclear, right?
Because I'm
But
like,
that doesn't matter.
Because I'm like, because like,
It does a bit.
no, it
if
doesn't. 'cause
Pesci's looking at him and going like, kid.
Yeah, because
Like, I
it
was constantly throughout the film trying to say, what's the age difference between these guys? And at no point in the film was I
It doesn't
really
even
clear.
matter. It doesn't even matter. De Niro could even be older. It's about the character dynamics and the relationship
But,
between them.
Your age does make a difference. Like, I think that the seniority or the status of each, like if you're the same age, or like if it would have been weird if De Niro was meant to have been older than Russell or than Pesci. Like that would have changed the dynamic of those two
I
characters.
think it's a nitpick it doesn't bear much, doesn't
I mean,
hold
it
much weight
does.
to me.
Because it's or maybe not to you, yeah. But I mean, like in general, if you're going to go for that down that route of de-aging, you're obviously making a statement about age, right? So there should be some focus given on not just de-aging them, but like de-aging them to what point, or at least to a point where you can tell, oh, he's meant to be older than the
I
other
think the
person.
relative ages were very consistent throughout.
So you were very, like, when we just mentioned it about like Pesci looking at De Niro and being like kid, and you're like,
No, I'm
Are they
saying
meant
it's
to
weird
be-
that he called him kid because they both look 50, or
Yeah,
like they both
that's my
look at
point.
least 50. Like clearly Pesci was meant to be older. And it was just a question for me right at the beginning, like how old is anyone meant to be? And it never bothered me again throughout the film. Just looking back at it, I'm like, how old was anyone meant to be? Like, was anyone meant to be near my age? Because I'm like, I surely not. But then you think of like De Niro in the war flashback. I'm like, he's probably younger than me, right?
But that's the fantastic nature of this film.
Yeah, well, that's
It's
why I'm saying why it's such a great accomplishment, because it really didn't bother me in the movie.
the gradient nature of it, the way the camera moves, the themes of it, it all ties together into sort of, this extruded life and the experience of life, and it's all fascinating. And the de-aging, could they have gotten away without it? Most definitely. But
so
could
this
they?
was-
But they would have to substitute younger actors.
And that's what I was thinking
Yeah.
about today, because I don't think, like, as much as I was saying in our review of Doctor Sleep, that certain characters show up in that movie and you're like, oh, it's so cool that they just use a different actor. There's no digital trickery going on here. You're just looking at a human face. In this movie, I found it funny to feeling the opposite, because I'm like, yes, you can see the seams sometimes a little bit, but it's so effective in crafting this epic story that takes place over decades that you could not do as well, because you'd have the Looper effect. You'd have the bit where you have to change from Joseph Gordon-Levitt to Bruce Willis. And
there's
that,
too much of a gradual change throughout it all, right?
yeah, exactly, because it takes place bit by bit over these years. Because that's that one bit of Looper that I think everyone has a chuckle at, where it suddenly just goes from
It's
Joseph Gordon-Levitt
obvious,
being kind of
yeah.
young to him with like a really high hairline to just Bruce Willis in like one montage, and it's like, I was forgiven the makeup,
Love
but
you,
I don't know
Ron
about that
Johnson.
part. Yeah. So I thought this movie was
But I
really
love the
kind of
ambition
unique in
of
that way.
movie to do that.
Oh, absolutely. And
Completely.
like I said, it works for me in that movie, but I don't think you could do that with like 2 or 3 different actors playing this one character in this film. Because like with The Godfather Part 2, you have De Niro as young Corleone, and then what's his name as old, but there's like
Pacino.
so many
Oh,
decade
yeah.
Brando, so many decades in between that. You can easily get away with it, but this is so gradual, you know.
Yes, exactly.
No, look, I think that I think this is the right way to go. I certainly don't disagree with that. It's just it's still ambitious. There's still levels of uncanny valley there, but there were certainly scenes, and in fact large chunks of scenes, where you just forget that that's a thing, and you get immersed in not only the story but the acting. So there's some really just like I think you can put aside the fact that it's CGI.
I've recommended this to my dad, and I want to just ask him and interview him, sit him down for like an hour, and just like, what did he notice any CG? What was his thoughts on the film? But really zone in there and see, like, did he pick up on these things?
Yeah.
These things.
There's
'Cause
also
often
the
these
element
things
of,
go,
like-
he's just immersed in the story,
Yeah.
and he doesn't even think about
Yeah.
the technical side of filmmaking. He's just in it.
And that's kind of the trying to say this without sounding like a massive wanker.
Good luck.
When you play a game and you try and game the game, like there's a phrase for that. I think it's just something.
Gamify.
Yeah, I don't know. Anyways, it's when you're trying to like skirt around the rules, or you're trying to use the rules of the game, or how that's meant to be played. So if like someone asks you multiple choice, you're trying to think, one of these choices is going to be an obvious like wrong, and one's going to be an obvious right, instead of just answering the question with what you think it is. And I think that for people that think a lot about, like us, that would think a lot about, oh, what's the execution like? How are they doing this? What is the process? Like, does it look good in this light? Does it look good in that light? That becomes more of a focal point, and it can sometimes obscure you from actually watching the movie as it's meant to be enjoyed, which is forget about enjoy the illusion of it.
Yeah.
So-
I guess if I can be succinct for once in my life, I would sum it up by saying that I'm really impressed by how little I thought about it during the 3.5 hour long movie.
Given what
Given that it was my main focus going in, even.
Completely agree.
So
thumbs up all around on the de-aging.
sort of, it seems to me like
I'd say massive thumbs up on my end.
If I can talk about one more thing slightly outside of the film itself, I don't know how much you guys have read about this or looked into it, but this is based on the book I Hear You Paint Houses, which was about the confessions of this guy, Frank Sheeran, which seem wildly unsubstantiated, like just a complete fantasy of a dying man.
It's just him saying that, or alluding to the fact that he was the guy that shot Jimmy Hoffa,
along with a lot of other very, very high claims,
like how the Buffalino crime family was actually involved with the CIA to provide like a plot to kill Castro.
And Kennedy pops up in there as well.
It is so far fetched that it kind of feels like it could be true. Sometimes,
and then
like
Martin Scorsese's made a movie about it.
Well, yeah. But if someone says that kind of thing, you're like, there's no way that you would expect us to believe that. Like, this almost has to be true.
Well, anyway, we don't have to debate whether it is, because we can establish we do not know either way. But how do you guys feel about this film as adapting real life events, but potentially a heavily fictional version of that, or a completely unverified version of that? Did it occur to you at all that you're watching real historical people?
I did, but I was definitely thinking that, Scorsese's going to take a lot of artistic license here, and you expect that in spades. So don't expect a true representation of. Don't expect a documentary laying out, the fact by fact. There's going to be hyperbole. There's going to be, it's going to have that Scorsese edge to it.
But did you think that the main beats of there's always going to be, like you said, hyperbole, and there's going to be artistic license to make it an entertaining story. But in terms of the beats, which is what I think you're talking about, Ben, is like, did he kill Jimmy Hoffa? Like, that is
no. I'm almost saying that's irrelevant. That's what I was just actually more just curious about your thoughts about the situation there, because I will say it didn't really occur to me too much watching the film.
I just enjoyed the film that much, and I haven't since gone and delved into reading more about the story.
I delved into it afterwards, and I saw the criticisms of Sheeran's confession, and it didn't really bother me. Like, I think that Scorsese outlined an interesting story, and an interesting life, and that in and of itself is worth putting on film. Like, whether there's actual truth to it is a bit irrelevant.
Yeah, it's kind of like that Roland Emmerich movie Anonymous about who really wrote Shakespeare, all of his plays, except that's like an actual movement of like Shakespeare truthers.
Oh, like, I mean, there's
weird.
like a lot of people that
this at least seems like there's not, like, I don't know, does anyone have a better idea of who killed Jimmy Hoffa? 'Cause I don't, so whatever. Anyway, on to the movie, I guess.
Let's talk about the movie itself. I was just, in terms of like the runtime, 3.5 hours, I can't tell you. I thought this was a sort of a 2.5. This felt to me like a 2 to 2.5 hour film.
So you did this in one sitting?
Yeah.
Connor?
I whisked by.
I did it in one sitting.
Cool.
Whisked by, and I thought that the editing, I don't think you can pull much out of it. Like, I've seen a few people, I saw a comment today on my Facebook feed was like, that should have been 90 minutes, just fluff and bullshit. And I was like, okay, fair enough. But I'm definitely in the camp that this justifies the end product, and that's definitely through the story and the themes and what this film is trying to say. It all ties together.
I completely agree because my experience of watching this film, and I alluded to this recently on the show, was that it felt very much expected. It felt very much Scorsese doing that, Goodfellas thing again, just going down that same road.
I don't think so.
No, well, let me finish.
Okay.
Because I really thought, it was just it was just throwing all of this mob detail at you and shit that doesn't interest me like crazy, but there was a point where his wife showed up for one of her like 2 scenes in the film, and I was like, why do they even include his family in this? Like, what's the point of that? Like, it seems so extraneous. And then I feel like the movie pulls the most amazing bait and switch right with that last 45 minutes or half an hour where it reveals its hand, tells you what it's actually about.
Yep.
And it is all of this shit, all of his life was not the point. That was pointless is what it's saying. And I think that wouldn't land quite so hard if it was a 90-minute movie. Like, you sit through 2.5 hours of this shit.
You get to know this guy.
Yeah, and then at the end it's like, oh shit, everyone's dead, none of that mattered. Now you're left with the fucking bed you made, and you kind of fucked it, buddy. And I was blown away by the ending, and it justified everything that came before it.
I'm completely in that camp. I think you said it extremely well. I thought that, as I said, it built into the narrative, it built into the themes. It was important for you to go on this journey with this character. And this film is all about choices. It's all about the decisions you make. It's and a life filled with regret in the end. And it's a fascinating piece. And if you did do it in 90 minutes, as you said, like you got to really soak into these characters. You got to get to know them. You've got to, sometimes with a film, and that's what you get with a TV series. Like sometimes I think to myself, why did I love Haunting of Hill House so much? It's because I got to know the characters extremely well. And what do I get to know in this film? You get to know these characters extremely well. What I was just quickly darting over to why I was butting in there with you saying, oh, this is Goodfellas. I feel like this is in a very different camp to Goodfellas in that Goodfellas, it's a lot about excess. It's a lot about a flamboyant life.
The glamour of it.
The glamour, the
rock
party
and roll.
Exactly.
Gangsters, yeah.
And this one, it's a lot more of a refined, they're businessmen. Joe Pesci, if you look at the 2 characters, he's way more put together in this piece. So that's where I was butting in there in terms of that distinction.
And the heights of their career, like there's nothing too glamorous about it in this movie. It's like, what the fuck are they doing all this murdering for? Like, it's squalid. And just to jump quickly over to Joe Pesci, I loved the kind of casting of him as the antithesis of what he's known for, working with Scorsese as just this kind of peacekeeper almost. He's trying to kind of keep it. And then him at the end was heartbreaking. I was not expecting that from Joe Pesci. When he's in the prison and he's just falling apart and they wheel him off and you never see him again.
And it's amazing because like that's it spoke to me because that the last time I saw my grandma, like she just like, we were just out and my dad was like, oh, she's unwell, and she went off. And that was it was almost the same thing, just seeing like going off.
He was
and I was
there
like,
and then he wasn't.
And then it was like, that's how it goes. That's life.
Yeah, and it's like, what was all that shit he was doing? All the bad stuff they did? What did that mean?
And it was like the realism of that, and like there wasn't like a montage of all those moments they had together. It was like, that's it. That's the cold hard truth. And it was fascinating.
Sorry, I'm going to let you speak in 1 second. I just
I've been very patient.
I know. I just want to wrap up. I thought maybe you guys take Frank's character differently, but I thought there was this amazing kind of lack of recognition to him. Like, he seemed regretful without being remorseful, actually, when he was like talking to the priest and everything and talking to the reporters. He's like, he was still trying to justify everything. He's like, I was just trying to look after you guys.
I think it was like he was regretful of where he ended up, but he didn't regret anything he did.
Totally, yeah.
So
address all of our points.
There's nothing in this film that I think is particularly bad or that I would like immediately look at and chop out. But I also feel as though this movie is too long. I do. And I think that, the best way that I can sum it up in terms of how I felt about the runtime, which is I want to watch this again, but I do not want to invest 3.5 hours into it. Because that is a significant amount of time. And this movie, I think this movie's greatest attribute is kind of what you guys mentioned, which is the ending. That there's all this cool mob stuff, and there's some really interesting stuff that happens in it, and the relationships and the tension building and all of that kind of ends up with this kind of the fizzle as opposed to a bang. And it's this, I think what it felt like to me was Scorsese doubling down on what he said his message was with The Wolf of Wall Street, which is that this is all great, but it doesn't pay off at the end, which I don't think he quite hit the nail on that. Like, I don't think he really hit it out of the park with that, with The Wolf of Wall Street, because what a lot of people took out of that, it was how great are those party scenes. So I think he really wanted to like nail it home on this one. Like he wanted to say, that's all great, but there's nothing at the end. There's no resolution that makes it all good.
Yeah, look at the final chapter of this story. It felt like him addressing the complaints that he's been receiving his entire career, which is that he glamorizes these criminal lifestyles without moralizing to the audience, which, you know, it's debatable, because I watch Wolf of Wall Street and I feel like I get the point of that. I'm like, this Jordan Belfort is a piece of shit. And I think it's hilarious that he is in the movie himself. And it's like, oh man, he doesn't get what this movie's about. But then again, seems like a lot of people don't get what that movie's about necessarily. Not to be judgmental of them, because it's not part of the direct text of the film necessarily. So it feels like with this movie, which is so ideal given the story within it himself, like an aging director presenting this story, this is probably going to be like the last gangster movie he makes, definitely, with all these actors and everything. It feels like him...
Particularly on this scale, it took him like 2.5 years to do it.
100%, yeah. So it feels like him really kind of closing the book on these stories and saying, this is what I meant.
Yeah, and so I thought that was really impressive. And maybe you needed that runtime to be able to pull it off. But like I said, this might just be the impossible game of like, you needed that long to pull it off, but I still don't think it's worth it. Like, I don't think, when I think about this as a piece of art or a film or that, I'm like, I'm not willing to invest another 3.5 hours. But I couldn't tell you necessarily a bad part of this film. But there's probably entire sequences that if you cut it out, it probably wouldn't make that much difference to me on a viewing level.
Totally, you'd be able to...
Not everything feels necessary.
It all adds up, you know. It all...
Yeah. I think a lot of that stuff is in there because it connects with different moments in history, and you're kind of like, cool. Like, this whole thing is like a history lesson, right? And I think I think there are scenes in that are particularly relevant for people that have an in-depth understanding of the Buffalino crime family or certain major events in American history. But in terms of like storytelling, like just this story as this one piece of literature or storytelling are somewhat irrelevant, I think. Not bad, just not particularly needed in the context of this story.
Yeah, and maybe little anchor points to sort of center, you know, show time, the movement of time and whatnot.
But I mean, like, so there's the scene of De Niro going down and bringing the shipment of guns down to Florida, and they're giving guns to Cuba, and it's kind of like, cool, like that's something that happened in his life, and that's something he claimed was a part of that story. But in the context of the Irishman, the movie, the story, not particularly necessary. Like, it doesn't really call back that much. There's that one moment where he's like, oh, it's big ears, and you're like, okay, cool, there's that circle complete, I guess.
I just feel like you missed the moment where the guy says, like, are you looking at my ears? Because they're not big. I got them fixed.
I mean, again, not a bad... Like, I'm not saying it's a bad scene.
Jesse Plemons talking about the fish in the car. I'm like, I don't know what any of this means, but I enjoy this.
Not like a bad film, not a bad scene, not something that I would be like, you know, easily like, oh, just chop it out. But also didn't feel as though it was necessary to the story. Maybe that's the point. Like, I don't know.
I think it all adds up. And I think the way the impact of that final 30 minutes where it all comes together is in this notion that this film is trying to convey, and Frank Sheeran, the character Frank Sheeran, he is one of the most loyal characters, well, I mean, maybe that's up
To
for
a- to a
debate.
point.
But he he doesn't have ego about him. He is he'll do what needs to be done, but there's this idea in here that he's kind of just he doesn't make any choices for himself. The choice he makes is to go along with other people's choices. So Russ tells him, hey, we're driving here, jump on this plane, you go do this. That's the way it's going to go down. And I felt like a really key component to this film is this idea of make your own choice in life, because it's not, in the end, he didn't look after himself. He didn't look after his family. His daughter felt alienated from him in the end. And it's a life filled with regret,
See,
You didn't see that?
I like that. I think that's great.
In a weird sense, like when you say a life filled with regret, he didn't really seem like he regretted anything at the end.
It was a regret of it wasn't a regret of any. He was wearing the ring at the end. He still believed in everything that he did.
Yeah.
It was a regret that it didn't work out in a happy ending. But there was no sort of the events that led to where he was. There was no regret there. So I agree with what you're saying.
Yeah.
It was a regret that he was just trying to patch it up with his daughter. He's like, is there anything I can do?
Yeah.
He's just trying to patch it up, but he doesn't understand the consequences of all those actions over so many decades that just inform, she can't go back on those decisions. And yeah, that for me, and that made this so heartbreaking, because at the end, Frank Sheeran's taking out Jimmy Hoffa. You can't fucking believe it. It's going to happen. It's telegraphed in a way. It's going to happen, and it's done so successfully. But you still can't. You feel bad for this guy. Like I still was kind of on this guy's side, and it was that Scorsese double-edged sword that he does so well.
He really skirts the line of he doesn't give it to you in black and white of like good guy, bad guy. He gives you like a justification. You don't feel at any point that this is the right thing for Frank to do, or that he's a good person, but you also feel as though he's human and you understand the decisions that he made in some sense.
Exactly.
I think that's good storytelling. That's presenting real people with real reactions that you can kind of. There's a lot of times in film that you watch someone do something, you're like, that decision would never be made by a real human being. Like that's purely for story, or that's purely for effect, or it's purely for whatever it may be. Whereas I feel like everything that Frank did in this film, or anything that anyone did in this film, was something that you could reasonably see a human being doing. Like it made sense. The justification was there. Not that it was right, but that it was understandable.
You didn't
as a human
agree with
being.
it.
Yeah.
But you saw how it was informed.
Yeah, it doesn't condone his actions, but it shows why he's doing it. It shows every step of the way why that's happening. And then there's something I think so personally affecting about seeing where he ends up.
Yeah.
Because like that last shot is so haunting of him just there with the door half open. It's like, how do I avoid that? Like, because he was just moving along through his life almost as if it was predetermined. He was a very passive protagonist. He was just doing what he was told. He was just doing what he was thinking was right, even though it clearly wasn't. But and then you see where he ends up. It's like
wanting to become part of like a group, a family, like the recognition that comes along with that, and the people giving him things, and he's like, this sense of loyalty and belonging and all that. And I think there was that we keep mentioning it, but it was a really strong way to end, being like that was all temperamental. Like it's all, you can't hold on to that kind of temporary belonging or achievement. And the thing that you should have been focusing on more, which is family, you now don't have. Those are the people that will be around you at the end. So
yeah.
We talked briefly about how this is a bunch of actors who are maybe in some people's views past their prime, haven't been putting out a lot of great stuff over the past decade or two. How do you think everyone fared in this?
That is a false statement.
Spectacular.
This is just amazing work.
It's a false statement that they haven't been putting out good stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, Pacino's
Haven't
really
you
been on
seen
the top
Meet
of
the
his game.
Fockers?
Fuck.
Well, let's go through them. Let's start with De Niro, obviously the anchor of the film.
this guy has a way of reading lines that come off so natural. He seems like he's just in a conversation. I'm sure if he went to the script, though, it wouldn't be improvised. It would be, those are his lines, and he truly is a master of his craft.
Him and Pesci in this, I think, were phenomenal.
They riff off each other amazingly well. You can see the gang is truly back together.
Those two, yeah. Al Pacino was really good. I think him as Jimmy Hoffa was good.
Very Al Pacino performance.
Yeah.
Just a lot of
So
shouting
loud.
and hoo-ah!
But and I thought that there was that scene at the appreciation dinner where Hoffa was talking to Russell. That was a spectacular scene. But I think the anchor of this is Pesci. I loved Pesci.
He was outstanding.
Incredible.
He was so good and so reserved.
Yes.
Yeah. And I thought that his level of you could never quite tell how powerful he was, but you could also tell how powerful he was. Like it was this perfect line that he walked.
The level of influence.
Yeah.
But there was still he's like, at one point he's like the uppers, so he wasn't the top of the food chain, but he had a good piece of the pie somewhere in the middle there. And I thought that was interesting world building, as it were.
So did you get the sense? Did you get the idea that he was the crime? He was the Buffalino crime boss.
Because
he's a real person. He was.
Maybe he was the top. Maybe that was the whole thing. Is he was bluffing about that? I don't know.
No, that's what I'm saying. Because he was in real life. He was the head of the Buffalino crime family for decades, I think, or something like that. And the movie never quite solidifies it. I don't mind that. I quite like that you never really understood where he sat solidly in the hierarchy.
I didn't even really think about that. Even mentioning that, it was kind of superfluous to me.
Yeah. It also it gave me this sense of it was more real because the cartoonish, I guess, idea of a mob is that you got the boss and then you got the underlings and there's a very kind of structure. I think there obviously is that hierarchy, but this felt more it felt more dangerous because you didn't know where people belonged or how high up or low they were, and I just liked it. And you'd get little comments about when Hoffa wants to take out the little man, and people just being like, "You can't do that. He's someone important."
Yeah,
I loved that sense of oh right, that that's someone important.
I loved what is it, Tommy from Snatch? I don't know his name. The other union guy.
Joe
Hoffa was clashing with.
Yeah, the little man. Time. Joe something or other.
Yeah, the
Abbott or Abby or
all that stuff about being late to meetings.
Yeah,
that was all
so
brilliant.
good.
That was so entertaining to watch.
And I love those interactions back at the the Robert De Niro's big celebration. The interactions between Robert De Niro and the second interaction was between him and Al Pacino. It was really persuasive, just really trying to, come on, bro,
you felt just, for that those scenes where he's you tell him,
you are killing yourself.
You tell him,
you are
and
literally
you felt for De Niro, man. You had this outpouring of sympathy of he's trying to help his friend and he's trying to appease. We've all been there where someone's you have to tell this person something. You're ugh, and fuck.
You almost knew that De Niro was going to do it as well. Not only did he have to try and convince him not to, and he failed at that, but he knew in the end the narrative was going to end up in the place where it did, which was it was in that moment you kind of subconsciously knew that was going to happen somehow.
Such a great illustration of how unnecessary it was. It was just egos clashing over nothing.
But there was some people are saying this, that, and the other.
Yeah.
So, please do X, Y, Z. There's a very gentle initial interaction that escalates extremely quickly. And I like those interactions. Anything else?
In this movie?
Cinematography and the overall technical side of it was
spot on.
Maybe not as flashy as you sometimes get with Scorsese, particularly in recent years, but it definitely seemed to have this sort of sweeping, steady cam, floating through time aspect to it. And
I thought there was a very interesting decision because he took his time with these shots, right? Lots of long lingering, moving shots, particularly that first one, which is just it's pretty slow and thing. And the first thing that my fiance said when she goes, "This is a 3.5 fucking hour film. Get the fuck on with it." I was just like, "Oh no."
Here we go. Yeah, no, I thought this was just fantastically put together. And Scorsese, he does this thing where it has this sort of bluish tinge to it, and I just love the grading that he puts on his films, and the image, the image is just very, very beautifully put together.
From a shot and a cinematography angle, I thought this film was.
I was sort of thinking to myself, I thought to myself watching this, like, from a kid growing up with VHS, how fucking cool is it that I can go and just click a couple of buttons and boom, here's an exclusive piece of content from Martin Scorsese for this platform. I think that's fucking cool, man. That's ultimately very satisfying, that notion.
That is pretty cool.
And the fact that the film delivers is even more awesome.
I am so certain I would not have made it through this on TV.
Yeah. Look, it is.
Give it a crack, man.
It is a slog.
Give it a crack, Jack.
I'm
definitely not a slog.
What time in the day did you watch this?
About 5 o'clock.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was a bit late. Like, I finished up at 11.
Oof. I'll get you. On a Sunday night or something, right?
No, on a Friday night.
Oh, okay.
But even then, like, that's after work, so
you're pretty spent after the week as well.
But I mean, there's lots of other movies that I'll watch that are more economical in the way that they tell stories, and I'm like, I can watch that on a Friday night and finish at 11. Yeah, like I said, I definitely want to watch this again, but I do not want to spend 3.5 hours doing it.
I could watch this any day of the week. This is just.
I'm so fast. Like, I want you to rewatch it, and I want to know if I feel like it flies by. I'm really curious.
Maybe the second viewing it won't be the same, but this particular one, it was just
because I think that's the real test, right? Like if a film
no,
on
I don't
second,
think so. I think you can watch a film once and it can be. I don't think a film should be built on the merits of rewatchability. Some films definitely should be, but other films, it's like I was in that cinema at that year, in that time, and that film connected with me in that moment, and that will never, ever, ever, no matter how many times I rewatch it, it'll never meet that.
Yeah,
and that's just a fact.
That's fine.
That's just facts.
Yeah, that's interesting because for me, this movie almost has a twist ending. So I have no real burning desire to watch it again anytime soon, or necessarily ever again. It's the experience of sitting through it that first time was so rewarding that I'm happy to just that was perfect.
Yeah, just leave it as that. Yeah, no, I get that.
Any final thoughts on The Irishman?
Well done. Well done, Scorsese. Well done. You showed us. The MCU does suck. I agree with you now.
Yeah, yeah, that's what happens when you turn 30.
Tell me when I'm old.
Sorry. It happened to me as well.
Fucking oldies.
Yeah. It's scary, man. It's scary. It's the Wild West out here.
We're talking about a man that is making movies in, what is he, he's in the 80s now? He's in the late 70s.
Let's see how Martin Scorsese is.
Man, I was watching De Niro at the end of this movie. I'm like, that's me.
It's I think we can probably calm down.
He's 93, sir.
Who is?
No. It's Martin Scorsese, 77.
Right. Yeah, I was like, fuck, there's no way he's in the 90s.
Yeah.
Cool.
Irishman 2?
No.
Who's keen?
Bring it on.
The
what happens to
edition.
him after he's just left in that?
What happens in between the scene when they're in the car with the going down the highway to when Joe Pesci gets wheeled off? Find out on Irishman 2. Guys, let us know what you thought of The Irishman.
Did you make it through it?
Did you watch it at the cinema? Or did you watch it at your home televisual station emporium device setup? Let us know. We've also got our Knives Out review up, so go check that out and have a great time. Just stay well. We'll see you next time,
Be
Connor.
happy. Bye.
Bye, everybody. Look after yourselves.
Bye.
This is going to turn into a self-help
Look after your
podcast.
pets.